Is Crying Child really dead, or have they found a way to return to the land of the living? Welcome back, my fellow gamers. This is Top 10 Gaming and I'm your host, Amanda McKnight. Today we'll be counting down the top 10 clues that Crying Child is in security breach and trying to puzzle out just how CC might be alive and well in some way or form. So put on your little tinfoil hats with me and let's get theorizing. Number 10. Rareness of new characters. With the exception of a few, many of the characters we've seen in these games seem to be continuously connected back to the lore of the Aftons. A lot of the humanoid characters in the games that aren't the Aftons simply tend to be their victims in some way. This means that either Gregory is going to be some kind of victim of theirs, or is actually somehow related to the Aftons. More than likely, at least based on what we've seen already. Of course, the same could be said for other new characters, or character, Vanessa and Vanny. Assuming, of course, like I said, that they aren't the same person. Then I guess they're a character. However, it is possible that Gregory will be neither and will simply become a new protagonist separate from the status quo, without him being a full-on murdered victim and without him being related to the Aftons in any way. Like I said though, it is surprisingly rare in the games for us to have a character who has both no connection and doesn't end up somehow hurt or murdered by William, so some people get a little bit of both. Number 9. Freddy and Friends on Tour, Episode 3. We see another connection to the Crying Child with the third episode of Freddy and Friends on Tour. Almost every episode seems to have some kind of connection to the games in terms of their location, and with episode 3 it almost appears as though the animatronics antics are going on within the house that we see in FNAF 4. The painting at the end of the corridor they run around in, the purple flowers in the vase, and the windows above the doors all evoke some of the feel and look of that house that we see in FNAF 4. This house is believed to be the Afton house, with both Crying Child and his sister Elizabeth each seeming to have bedrooms in this house. Freddy and Friends was created to help tease the release date and contents of Security Breach. So is it possible that this episode is teasing a connection to FNAF 4? And could that connection lie with Gregory? And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to hear more crazy outlandish theories from our brains, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. You know Connor and I have those theories for you, and our wild brains. Number 8. Glamrock Freddy. One hint that Gregory might actually be Crying Child could come from the story and mechanics that we know about in Security Breach. I don't know if you've noticed, but the coloring of Glamrock Freddy actually seems to be closer to Golden Freddy than Freddy Fazbear himself. And what do we know about Gregory and Glamrock Freddy in the games? Well, we know the two team up and that Gregory even hides himself within Glamrock Freddy, perhaps foreshadowing or mirroring the possession or connection between Golden Freddy and Crying Child, who is believed to be one of, if not the spirit that haunts that animatronic. I'm not saying that this is hard evidence or anything of Gregory being Crying Child, but the subtle similarities between the two seems to suggest that Gregory hiding in Glamrock Freddy could be a nod to CC and likely could be a hint at their connection. Number 7. 80s connection. While many people often point to the fact that Security Breach is meant to take place in the modern day and Crying Child was around in the 80s and 70s, you know, living his life, doing his thing, this doesn't actually disprove anything. Now, there are two ways that this could be dealt with. Either Security Breach, with its very 80s motif, isn't really set in the modern day, as we've been led to believe. Or, you know, time travel is a thing and maybe Gregory is the Crying Child but simply time traveled, perhaps through the ball pit, from the 80s Fazbear establishment to the modern day one, the Mega Pizzaplex. I'm just saying that's a lot of 80s styling that we have in this game. Perhaps too much 80s style for it to be considered modern day. I remember when this game was first announced and we were like seeing some of the images from it, I was like, I feel like that's gonna be in the 80s, and everyone's like, no, it's modern day, Amanda, it's modern day. And I'm like, really? Because I feel like, I know 80s is trendy right now, but I don't know. I'm just saying, if it ends up being in the 80s, that's what I was thinking. Number 6. kidnapped. This point actually comes out of something I've been pondering on for a while. While initially deep diving into the FNAF security logbook, I had a couple of theories. One was that Crying Child could be Michael Afton, and that Michael perhaps was brainwashed to forget who he was before, or, forgot due to brain damage. Crying Child therefore didn't really die, but survived and became Michael in some way. My other theory, though, was that Crying Child was never really William's child, but instead was kidnapped and brainwashed into thinking he was William's child. In fact, at the time, I thought it would actually make more sense if this were true for all of his children, which in that case could mean that both my theories were true, and Crying Child was kidnapped, brainwashed, seemingly died in the Bite of 83, and then was re-brainwashed or reprogrammed to believe he was Michael. So we kinda got like a reset? If Crying Child was taken, then what if what we are seeing in Security Breach is that incident? As I said previously, I know we are being led to think this game takes place in the modern day, but what if we were wrong? What if these are somehow events that come before the Bite of 83 and the missing children incident that we believe was in 1985? Is it possible? And if so, will Gregory turn out to be the child who goes on to become perhaps Crying Child and later Michael? This could be the incident where Gregory gets taken away and then become someone new. Of course, how is Vanny in the game? I feel like that's going to be a question people are going to have, and I don't know. Time travel. I'm not sure what's happening there. Number 5. Robo Children. If Michael is actually a realistic humanoid animatronic of some kind, and if Michael and Crying Child happen to be separate children and separate entities, what would stop Crying Child from returning as an animatronic? In fact, it is possible that William rebuilt Crying Child as an animatronic, but that Robo CC escaped his father, and so he simply made Michael from scratch to replace Crying Child. Or perhaps none of these children were ever real, Elizabeth included, and they're all animatronics and have been since day one. And Crying Child just was an animatronic child that ran away. It would make sense considering the mystery of Mrs. Afton continues to go unresolved, and since I'm not really sure who would let someone as strange as William Afton adopt kids. I mean, I guess he wasn't always so strange. Perhaps before the killings he was like a super responsible parent and people were like, yeah, you should totally have kids. You seem like a real nice guy, William Afton. Anyways, if Robo CC was a thing and then that animatronic escaped, is it possible that even if we are in the modern day with Security Breach, that Gregory is that animatronic? Because after all, if he was an animatronic, then he wouldn't age, right? After all, we saw in the Silver Eyes trilogy a similar scenario where Charlie learned she was one of a few different animatronic versions of the real life Charlie that were made by Henry after he lost his flesh and blood daughter and also lost his mind. Is it possible that this story serves to lay the groundwork for what is going on here with Gregory, possibly being a robotic version of the Crying Child? And if so, perhaps he came to the Mega Pizzaplex on purpose. Perhaps he is here to end his father, William Afton, for good. Maybe it's William that should be afraid of Gregory, I don't know. Number 4. FNAF 4 protagonist. Something that is very interesting is that we don't really see many other child protagonists in the Five Nights at Freddy's games. Despite this whole franchise really appealing to a younger audience, many of the protagonists we play as are adults or young adults. There has only been one other time we played even as a child protagonist, and that was during FNAF 4. Do you know who that protagonist was? I mean, you're here watching this video and we've talked up to this point, so I assume you do. It was Crying Child. Yep, it was Crying Child. Considering there was only ever one other child protagonist we got to play as, it seems likely that this time around, where we once again play as a child, that we could be playing as the same child from FNAF 4. Now if that's the case, it would mean that Gregory is the Crying Child. Of course, they could be two separate child protagonists, but just saying it's really rare. Number 3. The parallels continue. The crazy thing is that the FNAF 4 connections don't really end there with the whole child protagonist part. Not only is Security Breach the only other game with a child protagonist in the franchise thus far, but the stories even overlap somewhat in terms of broad strokes. Both seemingly center around a child who experiences some kind of horror or trauma, ruining a family-friendly place they initially loved. Both also have a child protagonist who is guided or aided in some way by a bear aware figure who seems to understand the situation that said protagonist is dealing with. Some also think that the purple animatronic hand we see in the trailer that is claw-like resembles the look of a Nightmare animatronic, and some also see parallels between how Vanessa and psychic friend Fredbear both seem to try and comfort the protagonist in their respective games. Number 2. Recurring. Just think about all the other games in the franchise. Many characters are recurring, and we've played as the same protagonist before in this series. In both FNAF 1 and FNAF 5 Sister Location, we play as Michael Afton, or at least we appear to be playing as Michael Afton anyways. And in FNAF 3, there are many people that believe we are still playing as Michael in that game, although it's not really confirmed. The fact that recurring characters and protagonists are a thing in this world also seems to suggest that this could be the case this time around. And like I said, we've only seen one other child protagonist, so CC, is it you? Number 1. Similar appearance. So the look of Gregory and Crying Child isn't a one-for-one by any means, but they do have similarities when it comes to their appearance. Namely, they have the same hair color. I mean, also we don't really know Crying Child's eye color, but they also seem to have the same eye color. They both have dark eyes. Gregory has brown eyes, Crying Child has black eyes, I guess. Not really a thing, so I assume they're supposed to be brown. Also, while we haven't gotten a great look at Gregory's outfit via the trailers, some fans have taken to drawing him with 2 stripes on his shirt, which would also make him resemble Crying Child. We don't know if he's got 2 stripes on his shirt, and in fact it seems unlikely just based on what we've seen of him, but he could end up having those stripes, and if he did, that would be another similarity. We'll likely even see Gregory cry in game, as everything that appears to be happening to him is really scary, so there could also be that as well when it comes to his appearance. What do you think? Is Crying Child Gregory? Is Gregory a robot? Was Gregory ever adopted by, or is he seemingly related to William Afton? Or do you think he exists completely with no connection to previous lore? Just a random kid trapped in a terrifying situation. Let us know your thoughts and your theories in the comments below. This has been Top 10 Gaming, and I'm your host Amanda McKnight, reminding you as always to keep on gaming on. Pew pew!